Next on our agenda is Sam Northern sharing with us some ideas about technology. And Sam, I know you're there. Welcome. Sam is an elementary librarian in Simpson County. He is also someone who is doing work with gifted children, completed his gifted endorsement last year, and is working in the doctoral program now. So he's doing lots of things, and I welcome you, Sam. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, it's an honor. I'm excited to present to everyone and also get their feedback. I'll try to make this somewhat interactive, even though we're online and remote, but I try to approach my presentations much like I approach my classroom instruction. And it's been a great morning, and I'm hoping it's going to be a wonderful afternoon, and I hope you get a lot out of this. And again, my name is Sam Northern. We're going to look at what makes online learning effective, and I am no master in all these things, but I'm learning as we go, and I find it quite thrilling to do so. You can find this presentation at mrlibrarian.com, which is also on my background. And there's a links page of all my presentations from Google Earth to PBL to Genius Hours. So if there's anything you want to learn more about, please check out that website. As Dr. Roberts mentioned, I am in Simpson County, and so I get the pleasure of working with a wonderful, gifted and talented program. Many of you know these folks. I work a lot with Jen and Diane, see them on a regular basis. I'm the librarian at the elementary school, and we're grades 1 through 3. And even though there's only 3 grade levels, there's around 700 students that we have in the building. So we're fortunate to work with so many students at the young age before they're officially identified as GT. And we do a lot of work with the primary talent pool. So if you're interested in seeing what all we do, you can check out our primary talent pool ebook. And again, this is at the presentation link. So you can click on a lot of these things, and it'll pull up information that you can refer to and use later, and just, you know, for your own benefit. So please check out anything that I have linked here. So again, my name is Sam Northern, and I'd like to share a little bit about myself, just so you kind of know who I am. I've had the pleasure and honor to kind of accidentally get into some really cool traveling teacher programs that are immersive professional development. And just one thing kind of spiraled after another. In 2014, I was selected to go to China for 4 weeks in the summer with the Fulbright Hays grant. And I just happened to stumble upon that grant by just over winter break, just looking at teacher summer programs. And from there, I learned a lot about these other programs that teachers can apply for from National Geographic. I went to Antarctica for 2 weeks. I've been a teacher at sea, where I got to work with NOAA scientists as we collected plankton samples. I've been to Bahrain. I spent 4 months in Finland to research project-based learning. So you can see a lot of these are linked, and if you're interested in applying for those, you have information about that, and you can also reach out to me, and I'll share anything I can to help you learn more about these type programs. I know Genius Hour and project-based learning is a big kind of an instructional model for gifted learners and hopefully all learners. And while I was in Finland, I developed a PBL toolkit. So if you go to pbltoolkit.weebly.com, you'll see everything from getting started with project-based learning to how you assess it, to resources, and there's even a blog on there that I try to contribute to on things I'm learning as I continue my work. So when I think about online instruction, there are 4 big factors that I've kind of come across, or I've put together from my experiences. And I'm going to use a lot of examples in this. And I'm hoping you can find some real practical things you can do with your kids. Universal theme is something we've learned and talked a lot about in Dr. Roberts' program at Western. And even in Finland, you know, there's a huge push there, which Finland's a top world leader in education, but they're even pushing phenomenon-based learning. having those big ideas and concepts that are anchoring students' learning so they can see things cross-curricular. So every time I'm thinking about how to design instruction, I'm thinking about what is a big idea I can come across to use as my anchor. We're going to talk a lot about collaboration. I see collaboration as the window which leads to new ideas, alternative solutions, and especially lasting relationships. So I'm hoping I'll show you some ways to collaborate with kids. Storytelling is a big part of all learning. And National Geographic is a household name, not because of they provide the best information necessarily, but because they are effective storytellers. And, I want my students to learn about that too. When you're learning and communicating what you know, there are ways you can do that that's captivating, that shows things in a new light. And so I'm going to show you some examples that we've done. And it's all about the process. The product is just something that, you can share and it's nice to display and showcase. But the process of what students do and the questions you ask and the feedback you give, that's what's going to be most important. So I'd like for you in the chat box to write down one word that you think all of these pictures relate to. So it could be something very simple. You could go deep level with it, but there are no right or wrong answers. I may ask Tyler for help on just sharing a couple of these if he could, and then we can kind of hear some feedback on that.
Discovery, inquiry, view, circular, vision. A couple more discovery.
That's great. Thank you. So, that's a wide array of words. I love doing this with my kids because it gives them a chance to be invested in what we're learning. Every time I try to think of something for kids to do, I think of how to spin the wheel so that it's not me telling them information. I want to hear what they think. What's their perspective on it? And that opens up conversation, new insights, and just that community that you get in the classroom. So, I'm working with some teachers on, we're really trying to push social studies and reading at our elementary school. And so, this is an activity that I put together for online learning this week.
Hello, friends. Welcome to today's lesson. We are going to get started off with a question. What word comes to mind when you look at these three pictures?
And I go on and I talk to them, and I like to embed my audio files on my slides for my online learning because then they hear my voice. I'm dealing with younger students, so even in third grade, students may struggle with words, and so that's just a way for them to hear their teacher and explain things. So, I'm hoping kids will give me some really interesting responses on these. And, some of them may be basic, it's kind of surface level, but sometimes not. I use this sometimes as a springboard to introduce that universal theme or that topic for the lesson. So here's what I go on to say.
Now that you have thought of your word for the three pictures, I'm going to tell you what word I thought of for these pictures. I thought of branches. There are three branches in the pictures. I'm going to connect this with what we're going to be learning. We're going to be learning about the three branches of government.
And then I go on and you can listen about that. So at least students can always have those gears turning. I want them to think about their own response. How does it relate to their teacher, to their peers, just so they are always involved. What I'd like to ask you to do is on your phone or on your computer, if you'll type in www.sli.do, SLI.do. It's all you got to do. You don't have to type in a login code or anything. You just type in NTI. And when you type in NTI, it's going to ask you to write down one thing that's worked for you, especially in the spring, whenever we had NTI. And this is a collaboration tool that I want to share with you. It's Slido. I use it a lot with presentations, but you can use it with students too. So you don't have to log in. You just type the code that I gave you, and I should be able to see posts as you enter them. And if you have trouble, let Tyler know and he can tell me. All right, so we got some learning management systems that worked well for your spring NTI, Google Classroom, meeting with students on Zoom, book clubs, Google Meets, Rube Goldberg Challenge. Awesome. I'd love to hear more about that virtually. Now the answers are coming in. Enrichment, being patient, giving grace. This is awesome. Good job. I really appreciate that. Jamboard, I'm a fan of that now for sure. PBL activities. A lot of this, everything I'm hearing, it sounds like collaboration in a lot of ways. It's just that connecting, that communicating, that network, even with your students.
Great.
All right, well, thank you. I'm gonna take this screen off, but this is something you can put in your toolbox, Slido, if you're looking for a way to collaborate.
Sam, there was a question in the chat if the students see the responses as they come in.
If the teacher's in the present mode like I was, they will. If they when they just submit their responses, they won't see it until the teacher activates the poll for everyone to see. Just as I presented my answers, as far as I know. So thinking about my life, it's pretty much on demand. I have Hulu on my phone. I've been on a big Rick Steves kick because I can't travel because of the quarantine and the COVID. So I'm all about some Rick Steves, and he's got 6 seasons on Hulu. So I'm just watching those like crazy. My meetings are on demand. My principal tells me to be at a Zoom meeting and I'm there at a certain time. And so, traditionally instruction has been on demand too. It's everyone gets this worksheet, everyone completes it, we're done. It's on demand. When in reality, we all work differently and we have to adjust and adapt. We can't always be on the go. And we can't expect the same thing for our students either. So that's something that I'm going to kind of build into this presentation, is a way that I personalize learning through a certain approach. And this approach is called the Constructivist Approach. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Constructivist Approach. You can go to this link. It's also in my slideshow here, but I'm going to put this in the chat box. And while I'm working on or talking to you about this, you can go here and you can see if you can put together where traditional aspects of learning might fit compared to a constructivist approach. And then I'll share the answer key at the end. You can do some self-reflecting. So you'll make a copy of this Google drawing and you can go ahead and try to be matching that while I talk a little. So, in the beginning, I asked you what the word you thought of for some pictures were. So I'm going to share with you those pictures and how it's basically my teaching philosophy. All students come to the classroom with their own life experiences. Whether you're a first grader and you live on this street, that street is your life, that's your world, your family, where you've been, who you are. How I can incorporate that as much as possible is something I always want to strive for. I want to recognize students that their personality and their world is relevant to what we do. So if I'm talking about the 3 branches of government to third graders, how can I tie that into their level, and what their world is about and who they are? Are my students from certain places and maybe their government is different than what, their heritage, the government of their heritage is different than the United States government? Or what about the school district? How is it like our 3 branches of government? Seeking and valuing students' points of view. We're going to talk about that, and I'm going to give you some tips on doing that. Again, that universal theme of what's the big idea that's going to connect many different topics and subjects, because that's what the world is about. It's not about siloed information. Everything's connected. And then my assessment is through the process. So going back to those big 4 factors, the process is so much more important, in my opinion, than the final product. I could probably give you a thesis on my opinion on statewide testing and things like SATs and standardized tests, but I won't do that now. So let's look at your answers. This is the answer key. If you match those, you should have got something like this. So there are times when the traditional classroom, there are things that you need to do. That's okay. It's not to say that I'm just totally going to be this inquiry-based, teacher that's, not sure. It's okay. I blend many different models into anything I try to do in design, but I'm always striving for a certain level. And that's my mission. That's my teaching philosophy. So just making it where it's the students in the center, they're building their learning through experience and by making sense of things. I'm working with them. It's hard right now with the online learning format because I'm trying to map out lessons, but I can't stick to that. I've got to be sure that I'm using what students are doing every day to guide and help me direct what I do the next day. So yes, I can map out a unit, but that doesn't mean I'm always going to stick to it that way. So this is something that you can have if you just want to think about where you fall and what your activity is going to be about. That's been handy for me. But I have a disclaimer too. It all sounds great, but you might get some crazy responses sometimes from students. I might be reading a story to some first graders and there might be a dog in it, and every hand's going to go up to tell me about their pet dog or that their Aunt Sally has a dog. And so, normally I might, raise my hand and it's, we can't really talk about that right now. But maybe if I stop and listen to their story, not only will I give them a chance to be part of our learning, but I might learn something about their world, their perspective, and we can use that as evidence for things we learn later. First grade teachers, it's a struggle trying to do certain levels of learning when students come and they might not be able to read. And, the sources of things that we use to help students make sense of the world doesn't always have to be a text or doesn't always have to be something that's really informational. It could just be what your example is from your experiences and letting kids talk about that. We can use that in a discussion later on when we're trying to help them make sense of information. So here's a clip from the Big Bang Theory, and it's a 60-second clip, but think about different people's perspectives before you cast them off.
Got it.
Okay, ready, set, go.
Box. Window. Batman. Batman and Robin. Wonder Twins plus the monkey. Wonder Twins plus the monkey and Batman. Gift, present.
Present, yeah.
Oh, Leonard. Now, how can you not get that?
In what universe is that a present?
It's not a present, it's the present. Look, there's you and me, there's Penny and Amy. We're playing Pictionary in the present.
So I just love that. I'm a huge fan of the Big Bang Theory because the way that Sheldon Cooper thinks is so much different than everybody else on the show, even myself. But there is so much truth in everything that he says. And there are students who come to us with their own experiences, their own knowledge, their own passions. And the more, especially gifted learners, the more that we can give them chances to share that and explain, it's going to be a learning for all, especially you, the teacher. So moving on here, I was reading about an example of a story where some researchers went into a middle school classroom, and it was a 7th grade classroom, and they were reading a poem, and the teacher asked them to tell what the author meant by something that was happening in the first 2 lines of the poem. And one student raised their hand and they were eager to share, and they said that the lines evoked the image of a dream. And the teacher said, no, that's not what the author meant. because maybe that's not what the analysis said. So they didn't really pursue, well, what do you mean by that? Or how's that like a dream? Explain it. So then another student raised their poem and said that the poem reminded her of a voyage at sea. But then the teacher dismissed that because they were only talking about the first 2 lines of the poem and not the entire piece. So then again, when the teacher asked, can someone else tell us what happened in the first 2 lines? How many hands do you think came up? There were no hands that were raised because she's already shown that there is one right answer. You know, there's a quote by Pablo Picasso in 1968, the famous painter. He said, the trouble with computers is that they have all the answers. Technology and whatever resource we're using does not replace good teaching, and it does not replace critical thinking. And so giving students a chance to explain and elaborate and give their own perspectives is huge. A popular model for online learning that, you know, we're doing, and I'm trying to blend kind of some rival models here I'm going to show you, is this first one is the gradual release of responsibility. So first I do it as the teacher. I show you, I explain, I model. Then we do it through guided practice, through discussion, through small groups, and then you do it on your own. And this is fine. This is usually best practices. And the beauty though, and I guess the spark of it, is whenever the teacher takes away that control and lets students do more on their own so that they can make those connections. So another model that I try to use is this 5E model. And it's a little bit different than the I do, we do. So instead of telling students, here's how we do things, here's what the right way is, here's the exemplar, I like to give students the experience first. Because a lot of our students are coming to us and they don't get to go to museums, they don't get to have trips, they don't hear a lot of things that maybe others get to hear at home and do. So we have to give them those experiences, because when I'm watching something and someone's just lecturing me or talking and I have never even seen what they're talking about, like I don't even know what that looks like, they've already lost me. Like I'm already just zoned out. So I like to give students experiences first before I explain the information. And I'm going to really try to show you how we can do that with online learning. Because once they have experienced it and made sense of it, when you explain it, it's going to really stick with them. And then they can like be able to compare what they thought they were doing during the experience and what the actual information was. And that's like that huge analysis of information, making those evaluations and critiquing things, high levels of learning. So a really good example of the 5E inquiry-based learning model is in science, where you have the engage, which is you're going to hook students in, try to show them something, a picture, a video, ask a question, like what I did with the pictures, where I asked you to give me one word with the earth and the mirror. You're just getting them to give you responses, thinking about it. What do they already know? Then they would experience the topic firsthand. So they would do the science experiment first, and they would try to explain what's happening and make decisions. And you would be there as a coach and kind of walk around, ask questions, but you're not giving them a lot of the information yet. You know, they might have handouts, they might have vocabulary, but that's going to be hard to do online. And so I'm going to show you things that I'm trying to do to make that happen. And then you explain it with the discussions, with the modeling, with the text, and then you have your elaboration, and then you can evaluate to see what they really got out of it. But again, I think the evaluation should be formative, it should be ongoing, always. So for this unit that we normally would do in science class for third graders, it's the life cycle. I'm trying to work with third grade teachers on how to do this online. So again, connecting with students, connecting with who they are, who you are. So we're talking about the life cycle. This is my family. You know, I have my wife, I have a baby boy. We look quite different, but what do we have in common? And so getting students to kind of have that connection with what they're learning, to who they are, to their teacher, I think that's the first step in getting them interested in what you're doing. Then I might ask them, what about you? I bet each person in your family looks different. How are you like your family? And so for an activity, I'm going to have directions for where students are going to draw their family in Google Drawings, and I've got a video tutorial for things they can do. And everyone in their family is probably going to look quite different. And I've got directions there you can see posted. And then they're going to write, okay, even though you might look different from people in your family, how are you like your family? So what are things you have in common? Because again, this is all going to connect back to the life cycle, but I haven't really told them a lot about what we're learning yet. So again, they are now invested, they're interested in the topic, and so I've already got that motivation for them. You should be able to make a copy of this activity too in my presentation. And Tyler, if there's ever any questions, please stop me, and you can, it's hard to keep up with the chat. I'm happy to answer those as we go. So normally in science class for the life cycle unit, the teachers would have a cycle hunt where the students would go around the room, and it's kind of like a scavenger hunt where they would look at a picture, and then they would look at the word for that picture, and they would read a question, and then they would find an answer to that question in another part of the room. So it's a lot about what do you already know about the life cycle? Can you put the pieces together in a scavenger hunt by moving around, talking to peers? Okay, well, how do you do that online? Well, there are ways where you can create choose your own adventures. You can make scavenger hunts. So you'll be able to make a copy of this. What I've done is I've got a Google slideshow where students are going to basically, it's what they would do in class, but they're going to do it virtually. They see the picture of the insect eggs. Now find the picture of the life cycle stage in which a caterpillar changes into a butterfly. I've not gone over any of this vocabulary yet. This is just students having experience first. I mean, I think this is great for gifted learners. This is the way they really want to learn. And so if students pick an answer, that's wrong. See, normally in class, they would go around to another part and find the poster on the wall. So they'll try again. Yes, they got it right. Now they have another picture, the pupa. Now find a picture of the life stage of an insect whose main purpose is to eat. Oh, try again. So this is just a way for you to be creative on how you can engage learners where they are in charge of their learning, even if it's digital. Any questions or anything on that? Tyler can let me know. I'll be happy to talk about it. So I'm going to show you some other examples, to kind of get you thinking. Teachers Pay Teachers is a very popular resource for classroom teachers, and understandably, there's things already created, especially if you're in elementary and you have 5 or 6 preps. But being able to just not take those lessons for face value, but if you do see a lesson you like, how can you make it more personal for your students? So for example, if students are going to use this Teacher Pay Teachers lesson where they're going to create a zoo and they're learning about math with perimeter, area, that's great. I mean, I think that's a really good hands-on learning activity. But could it not be more so where students are doing something where they're creating that makes sense to them? Maybe they don't want to do a zoo. Why does everyone have to do a zoo to talk about perimeter and area? Maybe let's make a community center because that's what we need for our town. Maybe our library needs to be remodeled. So what would that look like? Giving students those choices. And we can do that virtually. I mean, there's ways to personalize things through learning management systems like Google and Schoology. So just keep that in mind. Social studies, a lot of things I had to stop myself when I'm doing instruction because am I giving students too much information up front? I'm always asking myself that because I learned that way. And so I've had a huge paradigm shift from the way I've learned to the way I teach because it doesn't really come naturally to me. I was always given information. I take notes. I memorize it. I know it. I'll show you I know it through a test. I have to stop and do things backwards all the time. And that's my teaching style. So instead of just showing students this really great Nat Geo short video on what the Black Plague was, I'm going to show them some primary sources. I'm going to let them read from an author who lived in the 1300s and what was going on at this time. like, you know, the students found this interesting. I did this summer at when I talked to, while I worked with middle school students. And I'm going to show you more examples. Our theme was survival. And, you know, they read here that the churchyards weren't even big enough yet to bury all of the dead. So they had to go out in the fields. But first, I asked students what was going on in this picture. And they gave me all kinds of answers. They didn't know that this picture was about the Black Death. You know, some of them talked about how they were maybe taking trash out because there was a fire. I mean, there's all kinds of answers. But I got everyone to contribute because there was no right answer yet. There was no wrong answer. Then when we share things about what was actually happening at that time, I mean, they were just making so many connections. And so just stop and think about how you can do that. Tammy is a resource that my teacher is using a lot of now, where you can annotate and mark up documents. So this is a wood graving from a scene in the Black Plague. And so I could have students go to Cami and they can use tools to mark this up. Maybe they need to, my directions is that they're going to circle. So they might be able to circle something there. They can highlight things. They can make a text box and they can type. So less of me telling them everything that's happening and what do they see? Like, what do you think's happening? What's going on in this part of the scene? So again, making it student-centered. So there's a link to Cami if you want to try using that and being able to, it's a markup tool. So you can make it so students can mark up on PDFs and put their own answers in. Thinking about language arts, you know, whenever I was working with the students this summer, we were talking about survival too, and animal survival and how you survive based on your environment and your biome. So I let each student pick a biome, a different habitat that they learned about first, knowing that they were going to create a postcard that they were going to share with the other members of the class. So here's an example of a student writing piece where they're connecting again a universal theme. They're looking at science, they're looking at geography, they're looking at writing, and it's a really nice piece that she made in Google Slides. She had the front of her postcard. She found out that deciduous forests are common in Tennessee as they are here. She had a nice little greeting that she wrote that exhibited what she had learned from her research, and we learned from each other. And the teacher is the coach. You know, you might clarify the misconceptions about deciduous forest or add information that's not presented. And still though, everyone gets a chance to participate and to share. So there are links to how to go to the Build the Biome. And it's really simple to find a postcard template in Google Slides. I think I did a Google search and I found a template I could copy. In third grade, thinking about reading and language arts, students in third grade, they use a Journeys book. And you may be familiar with Basil's. It's books that the teachers follow to make sure they're meeting the standards. And so our goal this year is to make it more social studies aligned with the new Kentucky academic standards. So we're reading The Trial of Cardigan Jones, which is the second book in the third grade Journeys. And we're connecting that to social study standards about responsibility of citizens, about rules and laws that govern us, and even world governments. So this is something I made in Google Drawings after they've read The Trial of Cardigan Jones. Now they're going to make a connection between a sporting event and a trial. And so they're going to be able to take these pieces and they're going to try to match up who in the basketball game might be the defendant, who in Cardigan Jones might be the defendant. And then they can turn this in Google Classroom or on Schoology, and that way they are involved in the learning. And I love this analogy. Analogy, of course, is high-level thinking, being able to connect something that they know all about, sporting events, you know, most of them do, to maybe something they don't know a lot about, like a courtroom. So I love Google Drawings. I think it's great to make things that are manipulative, that are easy for me to put in Schoology or Google Classroom, and then students can make a copy of it, do whatever they need to show their learning, turn it in, then I can give feedback to them. Now I'd like for you to go to this Padlet. And if we don't have a lot of time for the Padlet, that's okay. But again, Padlet is another great collaboration tool. If you click on this link, you'll be able to open up the Padlet. And what's something that you did during the spring NTI that got students motivated to participate? I've been talking a lot about ways to get students interested in what we're doing, to see a stake in what they're doing. So what about for you? Was there a strategy, a resource, just some kind of practice? You can put your answers on here by clicking on the plus sign. Then you'll be able to type and you'll be able to have everyone's response here. And you know, this is great to do when students return in person too, because you can put this on your smart board. Everyone can see responses coming in. You could keep it up while students are learning and they just make notes like, oh, here's an aha moment. And it pops up on the screen and it's saved for later. Interactive games, math competitions, national, nice. Flippity, lots of really great things you can do there. Kahoot competitions, virtual field trips, that's great. Enrichment activities. Very cool. And what's really great too about Padlets is that, you know, once it's completed, you have it and you can save it and share it. And it's just a really good source to come to later for reference. Daily trivia questions, being positive, absolutely.
Sam, since someone mentioned Kahoot, I think this is a good time to ask this question. Someone asked if you have a preference or pros and cons to using Slido versus Peer Deck or Kahoot.
I like Slido for more of open response type questions where I'm not looking for necessarily a right answer. I'm sure that might be a capability in Kahoot. I'm mostly familiar with Kahoot based on like fun interactive quizzes and competitions that way, which again is really fun and motivating. Peer Deck is awesome because then you, of course, are getting feedback on the slides as you're progressing. So I would love to learn more about Peer Deck myself. I like Slido as something to do just maybe rarely because first off, the free version, I think you get like 4 maybe slides that you get to activate and give out to students. But of course, you can delete those and make new ones. So you got to decide which ones you want to save and which ones you want to delete. But I just think I'm about variety. I like to just give students new things they can learn because especially at my level, every time they get to learn a new place to click and a new resource to use, they're developing those digital citizenship skills as well. Good question. Oh, breakouts, great. I love digital breakouts too. Thank you, that's awesome. So again, I have like 12 minutes, so I think we're doing really great on time. Again, stop me with questions, Tyler, but I really enjoyed the SCATS program this summer, even though it was online. I had really great students. It was fun working with them. It really challenged everything I thought about, not only gifted education, but doing so remotely. So again, going back to these 4 big factors, this is what I have printed out and I have posted so that I know, always keeping these things in mind. Instead of telling students a definition of survival on the first day of class, for example, I had them go and find a picture that they thought represented what survival meant. I had students even take their own pictures and share it with us of something that they created in their house or around them. What I thought was really great was I got answers I expected, like shelter, fire, water. But then I also got something like this one where there was a person listening to music. And I just thought, well, how is that survival? Again, going back to Sheldon Cooper, there's always going to be a good answer. And she explained that, well, for her, the way that she survives things in her house, like the disruptions, the distractions, the overwhelming feeling she gets of homework is listening to music. So that was her chance to connect, to share something that I didn't think about. There's many ways that we can think about what survival is all about. Give students those chances to give their own personal responses. We looked at survival from all kinds of different ways. You know, I could have told students what a healthy city is, because there's a whole healthy city movement for what you can do to make sure that citizens have access to healthy, to clean water, to parks, to being healthy by making pedestrian-friendly sidewalks. But we connected that again back to the Black Death and how that spread largely because of the structure of the cities. And before I explained to them how to create a city, there's 2 examples from students this summer who made their own cities using this program, 3D City online game. And I've never even used the program. I didn't even tell them how to use it. I mean, I know I'm dealing with gifted middle school learners, thank goodness, because I didn't even know how to work this program. And look at what they did. I mean, this looks like something that like a game designer made. And they explained why they put the factory here and why they put the police station over here. And they were so invested in making these cities. Then I was able to make the connection to the healthy cities and give them that extra information about what's happening. And we just had really good conversations on that. There's a link to that if you'd like to use that with students on any kind of distance learning. You know, doing things where they get to share what makes the city healthy. You know, I do a lot in Google with giving students access to creating their own documents, to sharing things, to matching. So, you know, the I Survive Times, where, you know, we're doing a piece about healthy cities. They've learned about healthy cities from each other through the cities they made on the game. Now they get a chance to see what they really got out of it and share to the class. Again, that's kind of like the I do, we do, you do. So again, I think you have to think about what strategy works best for the situation. You can be strict constructivist, strict traditional, strict PBL, whatever is going to work for the situation. I really love this activity. So again, going back to storytelling, we talked about this television show Survivor, which none of them had really seen, and I don't watch it either, but we talked about how there are challenges. And, you know, if you complete the challenge, then you get, you know, special privilege, or eventually you may be the winner. And so this was kind of like a culminating activity where they took things they learned about survival, from how we survive based on our internal traits, like our motivation, our preparation, to maybe our external traits, like using our environment, building a shelter. So if you've never used Google AR VR Tour Creator, you can click on this link. It's free to use if you have a Gmail or if you're a Google school. And what's really great is that students can find pictures, 360 pictures from around the world that they can use to annotate on. So here's an example of one from this summer to let you see what it's all about. So she did a survival challenge in the Amazon, and she did these scenes, and you can see where she put in her story. And she was telling what the contestants had to do, what the challenge was about, what the environment was like. Each student did one of these. And we had a collection of Survivor contestant shows that kind of showed everything we had learned about survival. And I mean, they loved this storytelling aspect. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, students would ask me questions late at night almost, you know, after dinner while they were working on this. And, you know, I would get those beans, you know, on our account that we were working on. So, I mean, it's a lot of fun to do any way to try something different. And not everything's going to work out perfectly, promise you. It's not going to. But the kids are okay with it. I mean, I think we're our own worst critic. So give it a try, reach out, ask your school librarian, anyone that, you know, you can do something to let students be engaged that way. Any questions about that as we conclude? Another example before we do conclude, I really like this activity also, was we looked at survival from historical context. And there's a really good Google Earth virtual field trip about Anne Frank, and it goes to her her home in Frankfurt, Germany, to the secret annex in Amsterdam, and students got to walk through the secret annex, and it takes them to the concentration camp that she was taken to. And so students got to experience a little bit more about what Anne Frank experienced before we did any kind of activity on her life, and kind of remembering the survivors of the Holocaust, because they were survivors. So what students ended up doing for this activity is I didn't talk a lot about the Holocaust and genocide necessarily. I asked what students knew about it. But the point of the activity was talking about survival. And what about the victims? And not everyone did survive, and we talked about that. But you can look on, there's an encyclopedia on the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum of victims of the Holocaust. So I had a list of some child victims and those of the youth age, similar to the students, just to let them connect with some of these people and realize what was happening. So each student got an ID card of a victim from the Holocaust. They read about that victim, and then they made a commemorative plate in Google Drawings, or you could do it in Google Slides, that they all shared. So I gave them time to work on it. They got to collaborate if they want to do it with a partner. And we talked about, I gave them a couple examples of what a commemorative plate was. And it was just a really great way to see different ways of thinking about survival, but also thinking about it in a historical context. Because some students had read the Diary of Anne Frank. Some didn't know really much about it. But the point was to look at that aspect of survival and how it encompasses many different parts of life. And then there's this really great piece on the museum's website that you can have students listen to, where you can hear someone narrate.
For in its innermost depths.
So one last poll. I'm going to activate a poll on Poll Everywhere. What program or tool worked really well for you this summer or this spring when you did NTI? So let's see, if you go to this URL, I'm hoping I'll have enough time for this one. Let me see. It should let you go to pollev.com/samnorthern936. And again, we're a little bit short on time with this, but this is something I also like to use because it's really quick. You don't have to log in. You give students the URL and they're able to post responses. So if I activate it here, it should let you see responses if you can get to it in time. I don't have the link to put in the chat box. But you can also put this in the comment box of Zoom too. If there was a program or tool that worked really well, I've shared some Google Drawings, AR Tour Creator from Google. Tyler, are there any other resources that have been shared?
I don't think I've seen any other ones.
Okay, no problem. You can keep those coming in as we conclude also. Okay. All right, so to finish up, and again, thank you so much for letting me be here. Thinking about this situation that happened in a classroom that I had read about, there was a test where students had 7 blue chips and 3 green chips in a bag. And the question on the test was, if you place your hand in the bag and you pull out 1 chip, what's the probability that you'll get a green chip? One of the students answered, you probably won't get one. Is she right, wrong, or both? And I think this just kind of, encompasses things that I'm trying to get across with this presentation, is that there's not always going to be a right answer for these gifted learners, and we got to give them chances to share, explore, and to see things differently. Because as you know, some gifted learners are perfectionists and they see things a certain way, and that's the right answer. But the more we can challenge them to see things differently, that's the divergent thinkers that we want, and we want them to become. So again, thank you. Reach out to me. Thank you, Dr. Roberts and WKU, and have a great school year.